You know what goes really good with a cup of coffee? Especially a good cup of coffee. That'd be my wife's homemade pumpkin squares when they're fresh out of the oven. I'm telling you, it is sin on a plate. You drop back. Oh my Lord, guys, that's so good. All right. Let's talk about your medical stuff real quick. So, you always talk having medical supplies, medical training, etc. is something in that top set of priorities for you for preparedness, both from a everyday preparedness standpoint all the way up to including long-term catastrophic events, raw events, etc. One of the things that a lot of people focus on is gunshot wounds, and for good reason. Most of us, or I hope most of you watching, carry a gun every day, or at least in your house, in your vehicle, something. And as they say, along with the capability of making things bleed, you need to be able to stop things from bleeding. Could be on yourself, could be on somebody else. So gunshot wounds are understandably high on that list. So are other similar traumatic wounds, puncture wounds, really bad cuts, lacerations, etc., bleeding type injuries. But I want to relate something to you and ask you to give it a little thought. I think that in a long-term grid down raw type situation, that's the parameters we're talking about here, that excuse me one second. I don't mean to be rude, guys, but I can't just sit there and look at it. Can't do it. Sorry. Long-term raw situation. I'm going to try to speed this up for you. I think that there's something that many people may be overlooking. Now, you may not. I think a lot of people probably are. And that are work-related injuries. By work-related, I mean injuring yourself with tools, hand tools, injuring yourself doing physical labor. Somewhat related to what I said earlier, probably a lot of cuts and lacerations. I would imagine early on, probably going to see some pretty nasty injuries from like chainsaws and stuff until fuel starts becoming more scarce, of people using chainsaws who aren't normally used to using them to try and, I don't know, maybe get firewood, whatever. Then you'll probably start seeing other injuries from things like axes, machetes. People start having to use hand tools to do things. Knives and bad cuts. People not used to using knives, trying to do simple things like process food. Just things like that from tools and equipment that people, unfortunately in our society, are not accustomed and used to using. But along with that, how are you going to diagnose and treat certain things? And I'm going to relate a personal situation to you. Last Saturday, got a big maple tree that blew down in a hurricane a year ago. And I've been tinkering on it over the years, cleaning it up, but it hasn't been a big priority because it hasn't been in my way, hasn't been an issue, and I just haven't had the time to devote to it with it not being a bigger priority or an issue. Well, that said, it was time to go ahead and get it cleaned up as much as I could and cut up and out of the way. So my father was helping me, taking all the necessary precautions with the chainsaw and the axes and all that stuff, watching out for snakes and all the normal things you do to try to be as safe as you could. And we've got, don't claim to be lumberjacks, but we've got a fair amount of experience over the years of cutting up lots of trees and lots of firewood and et cetera, et cetera. So I had part of the tree trunk from more up towards the top, probably about a, 12-foot long section maybe that was about as big around as my thigh. Because of where it had been laying at, when I cut it off the tree itself, grass and stuff had grown up around it. So I thought, hey, let me just get to the end of it, pick it up, and I'm going to shift it over some to move some of that, move it on top of some of the grass instead of underneath it, so I can better see where I'm cutting and not be cutting in places I can't see. So I thought, I'm going to be smart. I got at the end of it where I had cut it, so that when I lifted it up, I wouldn't be underneath it. Versus if I was on the side of it, not only is it more awkward, but if I drop it, it can come right down on top of both my feet. If I'm at the end and kind of have it, like between my legs, got a wide stance, I can drop it straight down and there's nothing there to hit it, because things will fall straight down. Well, as I went to pick it up and went to move it, about the time I got it lifted and moved over a little bit, I thought, nah, this is too heavy. I probably ought not to try to do this. I'm just going to drop it back where it's at and I'll just push the grass down as I cut. Unbeknownst to me, there was some stuff wrapped around it, and because of the weight of it, I couldn't feel that there was tension on it. And when I let go of it, instead of it falling straight down, it swung and got pulled back to the left, and the cut 90-degree corner of that log, about 12 foot long, bare around my thigh, landed right square on top of the instep of my left foot. Had to get my dad to come help me get it off of it. Real quickly, I was working hard to catch my breath. It was very painful and got more painful by the second. And within about 30 minutes, I could tell you exactly what my heartbeat was via my foot. So, not wanting to wait, since it was the weekend, wife and I made the decision, I'm going to go into the emergency room, get it looked at, because there's probably a good chance I broke it. Fortunately, I didn't break it. By the grace of God, a lot of soft tissue damage and just busted it up. Probably was that close to breaking it, but the doctor said my boots probably saved me because it gave just enough support and cushion and flex and this, that, and the other to not make my foot too stiff and make it break. Anyway, said, good on you for having, good boots on while you were doing it. So, for a couple of days, I was on those things because I couldn't stand to walk on it, taking some pain medicine and whatnot, which I really didn't take much of, and staying off of it with an elevated and ice packs on it. Why do I relate that long drawn out story to you? If you've stuck with me, here's the point. In talking with our medical person, our doc, he's technically a physician's assistant, but for all intents and purposes, he's a doctor. He's got a lot of years of experience, and he knows his stuff. And he and I were discussing the situation, and he was very happy and very surprised that it wasn't broken. But in the course of us talking about it, we were talking about, you know what, we're probably going to see a lot of injuries like that. Those blunt force work-related type injuries in a raw situation. However, as our top medical person, how's he going to treat something like that? He doesn't have access or won't have access to be able to do x-rays. He won't have the cool little Doppler thingy that they had to listen and make sure there was still a pulse and blood flow into the foot, and that the swelling wasn't so much that it was cutting the blood flow off, because it was swelling up pretty good. Not going to have all that kind of stuff. Now, he's got a lot of stuff, but he ain't got an x-ray machine and all that. So his only way of treating that same injury, were we in a grid down raw type situation, would be to assume that it was broken, splint it, wrap it up, treat it for swelling, lots of, ibuprofen, anti-inflammatory type drugs, and I would have to be off of it for however many days until we were sure that it wasn't broken, and then even be careful afterwards when I started to put, weight back on it again, to make sure I didn't take an almost like a minor fracture and then actually break it by putting weight back on it too soon. That could put somebody down for 2 or 3 weeks. But again, how do you treat that? Well, that's what I'm getting at. We stock up on all the gunshot wound stuff and traumatic bleeding stuff and all that. But things like that are so easy to stock up for. It's not overly expensive to stock up on ACE bandages, SAM splints, lots and lots of ibuprofen. Get the big bottles if you can and store with just the generic ibuprofen. Anti-inflammatory stuff like that, Tylenol, all those kind of things that you can treat something like that with and make it through it the best you can. But that was my whole point. Have you given thought to treating those kind of injuries and those kind of wounds? Are you stocking up the medical supplies to be able to do that with? If you get something like that, it could be an arm, a leg, a foot, a hand. We're going to have to make educated guesses and, to a certain extent, some assumptions, and assume a potential injury like that is a break and treat it for the worst case scenario. Because if you treat it for a lesser case scenario and it ends up being the worst case scenario, then you can cause even bigger problems, et cetera, et cetera. So, the only good thing out of it was it didn't slow me up from work any, and I'm walking and everything now pretty good. And, a little tender every once in a while if I step wrong, but it's okay for the most part. But now I can contribute to our supplies a lightly used set of nice aluminum crutches. So, hey, not my recommended way of contributing supplies to your medical stash, but you take it how it comes. So, give that some thought, guys. Think about your medical stuff and what you're putting back for. Don't get, tunnel visioned in on gunshot wounds and things like that. Have stuff for that, but make sure you put away stuff for these other type of injuries and scenarios too. Again, for sprains, fractures, breaks, soft tissue damage really bad like I did, splints, ACE bandages, anti-inflammatories, and if you can, things like ice packs, that sort of thing. There are some that you can get that activate when you do them. I don't know how long they store for, but it's worth having. If they don't work, they don't work. If they do, then hey, great. So think about that. Look at your list. Look at what you got. Maybe think about adding some of that stuff on there, and think about those kind of different scenarios and potential injuries and stuff that could really put somebody out of commission. So I'll shut up. I hope that gives you something to think about. Get out there and store that stuff away. Stay safe always, guys, and I will see you in another one.